right. Okay, dearly beloved, we're gathered here today to celebrate New York Law Institute's Eileen Dolan, Tech Services Librarian, Ellyssa Valenti Kroski, Director of Information Technology and Marketing, also at New York Law Institute, and Chris Walunas, who's joining us from Kirkland Ellis Law Firm as a Research Services Training and Outreach Specialist. Take it away, guys.
Well, let me I'm putting it on the video, stopping the video only because I don't want the lag. Let me start by saying the group started mostly because I love to see my colleagues and I really needed just an excuse. And at one point in LAGNY's history, we had lunches on a regular basis. And I wanted to start it up again, but technical services, I didn't feel up to initiating and hosting an ongoing lunch and learn. I also didn't want to organize speakers for a monthly event. So I thought a book group, but everyone's busy. No one has really the time to join a typical book group. So I had quite a number of roadblocks there. And knowing how busy everybody is, I decided to focus on a quick read. And graphic novels seem to be the perfect thing. I was really lucky in as much as Ellyssa is a big fan of graphic novels. And at that point, Chris wasn't part of the group, who is a real big fan. And Ellyssa just started us off with several titles. And then we had another librarian, Myra, who was at that point still in library school, and she created a website for us. And it sort of went from there. Chris, you want to introduce yourself now, or?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Eileen. Yes, that's what Eileen said is correct. I believe I came on after like maybe the third or fourth one, I want to say. But yeah, I mean, as she alluded to, as a fan of the genre, comic books in general, and so forth, I thought this was a really cool thing. And at the time, I was working as a vendor. So what was interesting was my schedule. I kind of had relative autonomy over, when I could leave and where I could meet and things like that, which was nice. All of us here, in the island of Manhattan, could meet at, the New York Law Institute, and bring the physical book in the beginning anyway, and sit and have like a nice lunch and discuss it. And then it became something a bit more, as we, I think as we got to know each other, on a more than just a kind of quasi-social professional level. I think the graphic novels that we did read and do continue to read also have that kind of byproduct of allowing us to get to know each other a little bit more based on the subject matter some of these tackle, whether we do, we have specific opinions on, the artistry, anything that physically goes into creation of the book, the art, the lettering, the layout, that kind of stuff. So I think it has kind of grown to, be a much more, and pardon if this isn't the right word, an intimate discussion between us as both colleagues and friends.
Well, and I will say that in the beginning, the only book I was familiar with was Mouse. And, Mouse is one of those books that I know I can't read. It's similar to the movie Saving Private Ryan. I can't watch that. I just know I can't. And thankfully, after Ellyssa started us with one or two books, then I stumbled onto New York Public's Staff Picks, NPR's Books We Love, PAL's Best Books, and they were perfect. They gave us a wide variety of titles to choose from, and some of the titles are just amazing. And I will say, I think my favorite was, and it's more of a children's book. It's more of a picture book, The Arrival by Sean Tan, or Tan. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce the name. But then, and I think it was you, Chris, that suggested A Contract with God by Will
Correct.
Eisner.
Yes.
And at that point, you said something about the Eisner Awards, which, what did I know, was created back in 1988 and gives each year the best graphic novels and comic books of the year. And right now, I'm not sure if this is still true, but there were 32 categories that they give awards for. And we've read several of their titles and several of their authors. One of them was Fun Home by Alison Bechdel and Blankets by Craig Thompson. And it's just amazing the breadth of subjects that these lists include. It's always difficult to pick a new title, though, or pick the upcoming titles. And so I do use staff picks from New York Public. And one of the biggest criteria for us is that the books need to be part of the New York Public Library's lending library, or they have to be in the New York Public Library. One of the things I don't mention in my emails, because I always say the book is available from New York Public, is that it has to be available at my public library, because I don't get into Manhattan that often anymore. So the way we pick books is we have 2 or 3 titles that during the discussion, whatever title we are discussing, I will give an advance warning of these are 2 or 3 titles that I think might be interesting. And then during the meeting, we all decide, oh, that one looks good, or that one doesn't look so good, or we've read 5 Marvel comics in the last 3 months, so let's move along to something else. So I think part of the reason we're successful is that as a group, we choose the next title. It's not just Eileen picks the title. And
to add to that, we also do kind of like a polling system in that way. And even if the particular, what I find really interesting is even if the particular book for that month isn't the one a particular person would have voted for, usually they end up coming back, down the road a little, because, to Eileen's point, there's a reason why they get included in the potential pool of works that we do. And that's based on whether it's a contemporary happening that we want to discuss, or just kind of, a subject matter that we had discussed before, but maybe we're taking a particular work as a different kind of viewpoint of that subject matter. So it's still all very interconnected, and we're kind of building this collective kind of intelligence source here that at least that's the way I think of it. And even if we don't ever get to them, it's all about exposure. This might be interesting on my own, so on and so forth.
And we've also had, we got very, very lucky in as much as 2 authors contacted us out of the blue. We had Paul Karasek, who is an Eisner Award winner, and we had read his book, City of Glass, and he offered to speak to our group. And it was just amazing. And God bless Chris, he got LLAGNY to the local library association to pay the honorarium, which was just, it was minimal. But what a wonderful speaker. And he gave us insights into how a comic is put together so that it will flow better, and how there's sometimes hidden Easter eggs and where to look for them. And he also gave us examples of what a bad graphic novel can look like. If you've seen them, I remember them from my childhood. Classic comics had adaptations of things like Ivanhoe and Alice in Wonderland, and he had some stills of those, and you could just see why they were you just wanted to roll your eyes when you were looking at the page and think, who would read that? And then we had Ursula Murray Husted, who wrote Cats. That's the title, Chris? Is it just
A Cat Story?
Cat Story.
Yes.
And she talked to us about mostly it was her artwork, the way the colors are, and the best, or the part that I found most memorable about her talk was her telling us that she convinced her husband to travel overseas so that she could see the way the light was and the way the colors were with the way the light hit everything. Um, and she said she stepped off the plane, she looked around, she told her husband, we can go home now, honey. I know what it is. And it just made me think of the Nighthawks, and that, like, that there's a quality of light to that picture that, you know, it's just there. And that would, to me, again, it was interesting to hear the artist's perspective, because she does, I believe she does her own writing and her drawings. Um, so that was really a lot of fun. And I haven't been actively going out trying to get authors to speak to us because, well, we're a small association, and there's not that kind of funding for it. Then Ellyssa, God bless her again. I mean, along with making our first couple of suggestions, at one point we subscribed to LibGuides with SpringShare. And she helped, well, she didn't help me set it up. She set it up for me. She set it up, and I just continue. I just, I stand on her shoulders whenever I use it. And initially we used it just to help us keep organized. And there you can poll on it, you can do voting on it, which was great. And then again, Ellyssa taught us all how to use Zoom, and taught me how to set up polling on Zoom, so that we could do it on the day of, and we would know well in advance what our next books were going to be. And I will say that other than having Chris as a really strong, loyal book group member, we have very active participants. I think I mentioned that Myra, as part of her project for her master's degree, created a website for us. We've moved away from it, but it was great. And then another member, Karen, she's always very aware of welcoming new people in and trying to draw them out and get them into a discussion. And just having people like that as part of the group is ideal, because I just end up facilitating meetings, and all I have to do is suggest the book, and then Chris and Myra and Karen and whoever else is in the meeting, they're off and running. And I don't have much to do other than, oh, this is the book, this is the day, and then off we go.
Yeah, I think, and that's, I mean, the topic of this, this talk is how to maintain that, to keep a long running session. We've kind of gone through, 3 different iterations, right? There was the in-person one, which was lovely, especially down in Niley, had the beautiful dark wood library with that little bit of New York view. You can kind of see it outside, behind Eileen's picture a little bit. And then there was the COVID quarantine Zoom aspect of it, where, the world was an interesting place for those better, a little bit over 2 years. And, the fact that we got to have this connection, it really did facilitate a lot, I think, a lot of kind of a break from whatever was out your window and in your inbox for that moment, in that time. And then since then, now we're in the 3rd iteration, where the world outside is maybe possibly in some ways, and yet not, a little less on fire. But here we are doing this through our Zoom. Again, it's more of a habit than anything else. And then we get to see each other, in our various, environments, whether it's me currently professionally at work, or, from our house, or, from from the rest of us who maybe split time between the offices or where we live. And I think it's a comforting thing. I think, especially because we do choose to kind of pick works that have at sometimes very heavy subject matter, I think the comfort level of being able to discuss that in an environment where, we feel like we can, have a free conversation with folks that, will be receptive to our points of view is another really good kind of bellwether on why this group is maintained and continue to thrive.
Well, and I would like to add to that. I think the group is going to morph again. Again, Ellyssa, because of her part of her job title is Director of Engagement. She's starting to, we are going to try for the American Library Association Eisner Innovation Grant. And if we get it, we'll be able to be a bit more broader in what we read because we won't have to only use New York Public. We'll be able to buy whatever book we think is a great idea to have. And it will help us support. Again, Ellyssa, she has so many connections. She has Karen Green up at Columbia, who is an amazing source of information, who Ellyssa introduced me to her about a month or two ago via Zoom. And there's a wealth of knowledge there. And from her, we found out that who knew, and Chris is a member, I didn't know, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. Wouldn't that be just so cool that if NILE could have a collection that helped support them somehow? It would just be great. And I think that's where we're moving next. It started out as, I want to see my buddies for lunch and let's talk about something, it'll be fun. To books that are really help all of us grow. We've done everything from an addiction to fantasy to xenophobia, and now we're going to move to something else. And we've run the gamut of everything. And I think that's partly because of who comes to our meetings. And again, I will say it's just law librarians because that's who we are. But it helps. It helps us all to grow, and it gives me something to talk to my younger nieces and nephews, even if it's the conversation opener of, so what have you read? So what do you recommend? I'm part of this graphic novel group. And, the kids are like, you read that? Great, you should read. I get great ideas from them, and just, it's an eye opener for them too, that people over the age of 20 will read something like that. So I really,
yes, absolutely. I mean, and Eileen touched on it before. I think also, with the issues, with the topics that we cover, the potential sensitivities and almost like tender subject matter that we deal with, a lot of the times, and especially in this medium, as it's become, more modern, a lot of it is autobiographical in that sense. So not only are we getting, exposed to, the works, someone's someone's writing talent, someone's artistic talent, that person is actually letting us in to, a lot of the sensitive areas of who they are and what their experiences are. And with the kind of the variety of folks' experience in our group, it kind of also allows us to discuss those things a little bit, as they touch on each of us in our own unique way. And I think it brings us together as a group. It brings us together as professionals. It brings us together as friends. All of that acts together. And I think it's a really good way, once you identify that, and again, that's why, the group has, persisted and evolved, is because we're, building all of this each month at a time, each work at a time. And in that sense, going into next, as Eileen had mentioned, the grant process and what we can do, to make the group a resource, as opposed to just, a social setting. I think that's a really, really interesting and fun endeavor to be part of. And, that we have that, I think, is part of the kind of special attraction, right, of the
Well,
group.
and again, that I don't want to take credit for Ellyssa. She came up with the idea. It's why she's director of innovation. She's just amazing when it comes to, making a connection like that, and finding that ALA even had a grant like that, and that there was a way to approach it so that hopefully, fingers crossed, we get it. And I predominantly we would do ebooks, but I believe that part of the grant is we get the Eisner collection. We get like a huge chunk of the Eisner collection. And
So
I
awesome.
think that's amazing. I think that'll be so much fun.
That's so awesome. And Ellyssa, I'm sorry if I'm not, constantly singing your praises as much as I probably should, because you are fantastic, and I do miss chatting with you from a nerd perspective as we go through this. But yeah, I feel very lucky to be part of this. I really do, and I think that's a really great way, a selling point of the group is that all of us, I think, not speaking for everybody, but I think we can all say where this is definitely a positive for each of us in our way. And and for me anyway, there's just something about holding a graphic novel in my hand and being able to kind of flip through and pour over every frame, every little kind of facial expression, because each one of those things is a choice. And I think that not only does the topical and conversational parts of the works, lead to good discussions, but it's those little things that we can kind of maybe unwrap a little, unpack a little as we go through, and everybody kind of consumes it in a slightly different manner.
Yeah. This is Ellyssa. So I've been asked if I can jump in here about my experience, and sure, I was coming to this as a fan of comic books and graphic novels and a cosplayer who was constantly going to New York Comic Con and other conventions. And this just seemed like a great idea and a great fit for something really fun to do during lunchtime. But I have to say that, as great of an idea as it was, for those of you who are thinking about starting your own graphic novel group, I think that one of the big reasons why this has continued on for so long, since I think we started in 2015, is because we had a really committed, dedicated organizer, and that is Eileen Dolan. She was dedicated to keeping this rolling, every month, organizing all of us and, getting us to choose books, and not only that, but adapting. And as both Eileen and Chris talked about, the group has gone through so many evolutions and has adapted so many times, with COVID, and then bringing in various technologies to help expand the reach of the group and open it up to remote participants all over the country and the world through using tools like LibGuides and Zoom. And I think that the two biggest reasons that we've lasted this long are Eileen and the fact that the group has been able to adapt to all of the changes happening. And then also, as Eileen mentioned, a really dedicated group of people, a core group that has really been invested kind of since the beginning, and then even the newer members who just love the group as well. And when Eileen and I were considering putting together this application for the Eisner grant, we went to the group and asked if people could give us their feedback and advice, and sort of made the group an advisory board for the application process. And that really, really helped. And as Chris had mentioned, it's this using the group as a resource, and then the group feels more invested, and they are. And I think that the investment of the group members and the leadership of Eileen are really the reasons why the group has thrived.
Alyssa's being generous. I feel like all I do is put together, oh, how about the last Thursday of the month at noon? That sound good? Oh, and what's the 3 books we're going to do? Okay, here you go. I really feel like, I think it was Isaac Newton said, I stand on the shoulders of giants. I don't do that much. I feel without Chris and Myra and Ellyssa and a few other people, Karen, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing. It would have fallen apart. It's an amazing group. And I think what holds us together is that everybody participates and everybody feels welcome. And I think in some ways, as much as we all hate Zoom meetings to some degree, without Zoom, we couldn't do it because the Institute is it's in the downtown location, and most law firms who are members and come to the meetings are in Midtown. So just schlepping all the way downtown and then schlepping back and spending a half an hour to 45 minutes, it's too much out of a librarian's day. It really is. So Zoom is great. It's great for something like this. It's perfect. And there was one person, again, Myra, she would come in from Westchester. She would when she was in library school, she worked in a downtown firm, so not a big deal. But after her MLS, she got another job and she ended up in Westchester. And she would plan her day around being at lunch at the Institute. She very, very dedicated. Did a lot of work for us. And yes, I love Zoom now.
Yeah, as you can see, we are not short in humility here for all of us, but it is true. And I mean, it might be, for me anyway, I mean, some of the folks when I first joined were at the time clients, which was a little odd, which for me was a little bit of an odd, an odd step. I'm taking, my foot into a hobby of mine, into my personal life, and kind of sitting with folks that I are acquainted with professionally, but in a very different relationship. It's much more of a, at the time, like I said, a client vendor relationship. But I do honestly truly feel that, the group is so welcoming, and I think just the kind of baseline enjoyment of the media is something that also brings us together, and that it is such a diverse kind of way to experience storytelling. Because each title, the layouts of art changes. They're so very different. Some of them are very, extremely intricate, and are based in large part on some, for things like Eileen was mentioning the cat story with color. There are a few of them that actually do rely a lot on color for that. There's intricate ones, and some of them are much more much more. I know the kids use this word basic in a different way now, but they are very basic in their visual representation, but in a way that almost magnifies the subject, because it allows us to talk about what is being discussed. Again, whether it's something like immigration experiences, how people deal with certain communities within other communities, that kind of stuff. So I I think the group has lasted because of all the things Ellyssa and Eileen have said, and again, it's the kind of real love of the medium and the willingness to explore it that I think also adds a lot to bring people back month after month.
I think it's also, and I'm not quite sure who the audience is or what they expect from us, but I think one of the reasons we're successful is I might put the list together, I might pick a time and set up the Zoom, but we're all peers and no one takes the lead. I facilitate, but I'm clearly not a chair, and I'm not too heavy-handed about, unless we haven't picked a title and I do the oops. Well, next month we're reading. And that doesn't happen too often. And I do try to get the list before the holiday season comes up. I know that several people had asked that I always have 2 or 3 titles ready for holiday season so that they can add it to their, if you're buying me something, get me this book. So I am aware that around November that I should have at least 3 titles ready to go. And I think I dropped the ball on that one this time around, but oh well.
Well, we got lucky this time because we kind of fell down a Mild Fables rabbit hole. So we just kind of kept that going.
We did, and that is one of the interesting things about the group, is that if we stumble on an author that we all seem to like, it's easy enough to add them to the roster. We'll put them, we have next books month picked. I have 3 months right now picked. But if we find out that we like somebody a lot, well, then that's May and June. But we all agree on them during the meeting. It's not, oh, this is the reading list, here you go. And I think that's part of the reasons why we've been so long lasting, is that it's not just one person's taste. It's a half a dozen to a dozen people who are choosing. I might be going to some place like New York Public or NPR or Powell's or anyone, or the Eisner list, and kind of sifting through and saying, well, these look good to me, so what does everybody else think? And I might only float 5 or 6 names at a time, because I think once lists get longer than that, you can't really figure it out. It gets too many to choose from. And I think that's why we're so successful, or that it has lasted that long, is that I kind of pick a day and I set up the Zoom and we all decide what the book is going to be. It's not just any one person saying, well, here you go, here's your list, just like school.
Well, I wanted to, if it's all right with you, I wanted to ask you a question about the club,
Sure.
and just like, I guess, I was really taken by the emotional intimacy, and I think, Chris, you used the word tender at one point, and it's so sweet, and I think that's such a lovely, beloved community aspect. I'm wondering if there were like ways that reading the stuff, did your opinions change on things? Like, was there moments that surprised you, or like, I don't know, I guess I'm kind of curious about some of the mind changing or community discussions of evolving relationships in a group.
I'm bringing up my list of books that we read, so I can see if there's anyone that I can.
I have them too. I have them too. I guess for me, I'll go first as Eileen is looking up. I think a lot of these, and I, at the risk of sounding too glib about certain subjects, in the social aspect of today, me being I guess the correct word would be a white cisgendered male. I think going through a lot of our books, not a lot, but a decent amount of them have to come from the feminine, maybe non-binary, LGBTQ plus that kind of stuff. And I think again, for me, and I meant what I said before. For me, when folks talk about that, I think in the context of these books, a lot of them are like autobiographical. And for someone to have the courage to say those kinds of things and to illustrate in a lot of ways their vulnerabilities at their most, like I said, tender times was, it's very illuminating from a human and empathetic standpoint. That said, conversely, there's a book we read called Banned Book Club. And
Right.
it's about high school kids
Is it Korea or it's
in South
Korea?
Korea in the late 80s. So here we are today, as we think of South Korea, because of, again, it's place on the global geopolitical stage as a free democracy. The book outlines how it really was not in those areas. And again, they were doing the same things we were doing, reading comic books, graphic novels, things like that. And they literally had, military people coming to their homes and their schools. And this is 1980 in the 80s. And we remember, like, they had the Olympics in 88 in Seoul. So the world went there, but you didn't hear about that stuff. So again, that's illuminating. And a lot of it is also, I think the best part of having maybe your opinion or mind change is that it's a call to action to go look into it. And I certainly did that, especially after Banned Book Club. I definitely looked into that a lot more just from that perspective.
I'm looking at the list, and I think A Contract with God was, along with The Arrival by Sean Tan. I really loved that book. It was just so sweet. And I think it was one of those books that I said, and if you have time, look at this too. So we had 2 books that month. But A Contract with God, that was just amazing. The pain that's in that book, and it's an amazing book, and I can well understand why he was such a figure in the graphic novel world. It just, there were some other books that just, they were fluffy, but by and large, we're not picking just fluff. It's not, they're not light books. Many of them are dark. Many of them are, as Chris said, they're autobiographical and they're difficult subjects. They're about exclusion and Stone Fruit. That was a difficult one, just to watch the characters dealing with parents who wouldn't accept their identities, and or partners who didn't want to share children, and it was hard. It was a hard book. But then there were other ones, and I really do love the ones like the Fables that we read recently, because it's a little twist. It's a little twist on what we all know. And there was a few others like that. So I'm trying to see back at the list. And then there were other ones that, what was the one we read last? Queenie, description of Harlem and book, keeping book, like running numbers and being a bookie. What an amazing book. And if I'm remembering correctly, that was totally black and white, wasn't it? It was all ink, pen and ink. I loved that book. That was great. That was and then there was another book that was also black and white, and again it was on the verge of horror. Crossroads at Midnight. That was black and white too, wasn't it? It was pen and ink.
Correct. Yes.
And again, it was on the on the edge of being horror, or maybe it was horror, but because it was black and white, it wasn't so scary. But and again, that now we're talking about what we've read rather than how it affected us, and how it helps to continue a book group and how to keep one going.
Well, I thank y'all so much. I'm curious if anybody that's participating who's registered in our audience has any questions. Feel free to either drop them in the chat or in the Q&A. Yeah. It's so interesting that it's like tried and true tools like LibGuides and Zoom that have transitioned to now, but it sounds really fascinating. How many, so you all said that the club numbers have fluctuated like for like a half dozen to a dozen people. Like has that been consistent over the years from in person to online?
I would say so. I'm trying to think back to when it was in person because we all met around the one table. So I don't think it could have been any more than a half a dozen people when we were meeting in person. I'm gonna say that when they were in person, they were about a half a dozen, and now it doesn't really get beyond that because we are law librarians, and you know how law librarians are. Their time is tight. They're just, even though everybody knows at noon on whatever Thursday of the month is chosen, it all of a sudden you have some lawyer who needs to go to court and off you go. And not so much for me at the New York Law Institute, and being technical services, that doesn't happen. But I used to do reference at a law library, a firm library, just as Chris does. And there's plenty of times where your time is just not your own. And even though you have something scheduled, oh, well, judge wants this.
I can agree to that. There are certain times where, you can map out your day as with the best of intentions and almost have it bulletproof. And these are the time, this is my time. I'm going to carve this out. And then 5-10 minutes before, something happens, a particularly large project. You may have people out of the office that day, so coverage is a little thin. And this is a work thing, so it takes a little bit of precedent over what essentially is our hobby and social hour. But again, in an odd way, that also contributes to the kind of shared experience we have as a group, because everyone can empathize with that particular scenario. So yeah, I would agree with that.
So I see we've got a question here from my colleague Mary Bakisha at Metro. And the question is that, are there any books that led to a particularly good conversation?
We don't have bad conversations, but yeah.
I would say City of Glass because Paul K, it starts with a K. Karasik was there to guide us through it. And that was amazing. And so that wasn't really a discussion. It was more of a, look at this. Do you see where that I put this in the drawing? Do you see where that gets in the drawing? And a discussion about how a good graphic novel will have certain things and flow correctly. The one that I thought had a very interesting conversation was, and I don't know if you were there that time, Chris, Nobody's Fool, the stories of Schultze.
Yep, that seems to be the one. I have them marked over which ones I was not there, and that is one of them. So I was not there for that one.
That was an interesting discussion. just, the discussion of his life through, I guess, the early 1900s through, and I can't remember when he passed away, but that he basically was given away as a child to a circus. It's an odd story. I'm looking at my list. Oh, Whitebird, by R.J. Palacio. It's about a young girl in Nazi Germany who is taken in by neighbors and hidden in a barn. And it was similar to Anne Frank. That was a very interesting story. I really, really liked that one. And I think it led to a lot of discussions about xenophobia. And but that's me. Do you remember anything other than that, Chris? I'm looking through the list now. And
I
banned
seem to
book club.
remember the which was the one, I'm trying to find it. I just had it. I Was Their American Dream.
That was about the girl who's part Egyptian and part
Correct.
Filipino.
Yes. And
Yeah.
she works in she's in DC in the like she now has like a political job in DC. So she was talking about how she like in an odd way, not only did her parents split up at some point, but depending on what time of year it was, she was split between two very distinct cultures. Being her dad, they had split, and her dad had moved back to Egypt, and then her mom is from the Philippines. So it was, and they were both, I think they were living in California. So there was also that kind of Asian, assimilation issue going on in California. But then she would leave and go to Egypt in the 80s, which was, a very different place, especially for someone who is both American and non-Middle Eastern in that sense. So it was actually a really, really interesting, because there was so many different layers of the things that, basically a child was a child developing into an adult would experience.
Right. And then going back to the Egyptian culture and being with her stepmother and her half siblings and yeah. And the heat. You talked about the heat.
Yeah, the heat. It was just far too hot. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these, again, it's it's amazing what a single person can possibly pack into their life's experience to date. I mean, everybody has their own kinds of things, but when you see someone that maybe more the extraordinary, at least compared to like, my past experience, for instance, I would call it extraordinary. And there they are, being able to, again, I find it, I find a lot of these, especially the autobiographical ones, there is a very real admiration for being able to take that leap and work with, the things that shape you, put it out there for everyone.
I think the book actually that Bebop Barbarians was the one that generated the most discussion. That was the one that was it was written by, I believe, a Black person, and it described life in the 40s, 50s, right after the war.
Correct.
That was, I think, the one that actually generated the most conversation.
Yeah, and that one particularly, it marries a lot of different things. It marries that kind of, the very social music scene of Harlem, while also there's the post-war, folks who fought in that war but still came home to a particular society. Then it was also in certain quarters, there was the beginnings of the civil rights movement happening. So all of these different, kind of coexisting, realms of things, almost like a big Venn diagram in that way. in a relatively small geographical space.
Anything else? I mean,
Yeah, any other questions?
my biggest suggestion is let the group pick the titles. Just be librarians and know where to go to look for good titles.
Right.
And sometimes, some of the titles came from the group participants would be, I think we should read, and I think Bebop Barbarians was one of the suggestions. I don't think I pulled that one off of a pick list.
Mm. Mm. All right, thank you.